Imagine being carried off by a king who's supposed to rescue you. But instead of safety, you sense his barely contained rage. That's exactly what happens to 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬. As she's carried out of the cave prison, she tries to communicate with North, the wolf-borne king, but he ignores her completely. The tension is palpable. Why is North so angry? Is it something 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬 did or didn't do? And then there's the General 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬, who's always so serious and intimidating, but we find out he once had a mate who died. How did that loss shape him into the person he is now? And will 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬's growing feelings for North ever have a chance amid all this chaos? Let's explore these fascinating plot points together. Chapter 31. A deep, angry voice jolted me from my fitful slumber. I winced, my lower back protesting as I shifted on the cold, damp stone floor of our makeshift prison. Blinking away the remnants of sleep, I peered through the gloom towards the iron bars that confined us. Though I couldn't be certain, it felt as if we'd been trapped in this miserable cage for no more than a day filled with fear and despair. Piercing blue eyes, blazing light 𝐊𝐲𝐻𝐬 beacons in the darkness, met mine. For a fleeting moment, relief flooded my chest, only to be quickly replaced by apprehension as I registered the palpable fury emanating from the wolf-borne king. North, his growl reverberated through the cave, echoed by for others. Behind him stood his generals 𝐊𝐷𝐻𝐬, 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬, and thin like a wall of muscular, seething mountains. The ruby pendant pressed against my chest pulsed in response to their presence. Beside me, Mae remained blissfully unaware of the impending storm, lost in her characteristically deep sleep. I gently shook her, my eyes never leaving North as his large hands wrapped around the thick iron bars. Mae groaned and batted my hands away, but the ear-splitting screech of tearing rock and metal jolted her upright. What the hell was that? Her exclamation died on her lips as she took in the sight of the 4 imposing generals and their king flooding into our cramped prison. The color drained from her face, her eyes wide with shock. North, I attempted to speak again, but before I could form a coherent thought, he strode towards me, his massive, bare shoulders trembling with barely contained rage. In one swift motion, he lifted me from the ground and began carrying me out of the dark cave, his blatant disregard for my attempts to communicate tongue. But I pushed aside the hurt, focusing instead on the relief of finally being freed from our wretched confinement. I sighed, resigning myself to being carried like a rag doll. Throughout our captivity, I had desperately tried to coax more visions from the stone, clutching it tightly and pressing it to my chest, while it remained stubbornly silent. It occasionally pulsed with an otherworldly warmth that spread through my chilled body. Glancing over North's shoulder, I saw 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬, 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬, and Finn following closely behind, their shirtless forms radiating anger and concern. Mae was somewhere in their midst, dwarfed by their imposing presence. I attempted to raise my arm to wave at a scowling 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬, but North's grip tightened, carrying me deeper into the winding cavern. How did you find us? He simply grunted and eased us forward. I frowned. You are my mate, 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬. I can find you where. His voice was nowhere near pleasant. He didn't say anything else after that, and I didn't want to risk poking at the anger I could practically feel strumming through him. He set me down gently just as the cave narrowed, and then had to turn sideways himself to walk towards the opening. It was a cave meant for wolf-bornes. As soon as we stepped foot back into the treacherous wasteland, he had scooped me off the floor like a sack of flour. A part of me rejoiced in the fact that he was willing, carrying and holding me close to him. Another feared the reasoning why. The trip across the rough terrain and up the cliff steps seemed a lot shorter than the first, but that was probably only because I feared the upcoming conversation with the furious man who practically carried me. But I was expecting him to unceremoniously dump me on the ground at the top of the cliff and then turn around and stalk off into the dense tree line of the mountain. Well then, I watched him leave with a frown on my lips and a heavy heart dragging down my chest. But I refused to feel guilty. Oh, my lady, 𝐿𝐷𝐻𝐬 sighed as he finished his climb up the stone steps. his brown eyes soft instead of that icy fortress they were from the cave. "What a little troublemaker you are." I turned my frown to him, my stomach churning unpleasantly as he held his large hand out for me. My expression did not ease as I let him help me to my feet. I didn't bother responding to his comment as I watched Turf carrying Mae over his shoulder as he reached the top of the stairs. My brow narrowed in confusion and 𝐿 unrolled his eyes as the other general tossed the unconscious girl on the ground beside us. The ridiculous underling fainted the moment I grabbed her arm. He growled an answer and let out a long, drawn-out huff of air before turning those furious gold eyes on me. I gulped. "You, my lady, have a lot of explaining to do." His growl filled the dense, cold air around us, and the anger in it actually made me flinch. "Shove off, 𝐊𝐿. She already has to deal with North's temperamental self. You don't need to add on to it." And just like the big, caring man he was, 𝐿𝐿 unwrapped his arm around my shoulder and led me gently away from the simpering general. A flash of satisfaction rang through me, but it was easy to push it aside as 𝐿𝐿 led me towards the forest sedge and away from those ridiculous cliffs. "Don't not worry much about the king, my lady. He just needs some time to calm down." His words did little to reassure me, and I kept my mouth shut as I turned to watch Turf pick me up once again and follow after us, the other two slowly trudging along. They didn't bother joining the conversation. I'm sure they thought that the bipolar wolf would take his temper out on them. He asked furious at me. "It will pass, but you cannot disappear like that again. Immerse. You should have realized what that would do to him." I wanted to hang my head like a reprimanded child, but I would not. I knew leaving as I did would upset him, would make him more than furious, but I refused to let that stop me. Even now, watching him leave as he did, I still would have left. I had a chance to figure something out on my own, and I took it, just as I had done all those months ago at the village. But that didn't stop my heart from hurting. The stone pulsed against my chest, and I reached up to press it harder against my skin. It was so warm, so sacred, and it was mine. The one thing about this life that I knew was real. My relationship with Mae and her brother was fake. My childhood a lie. My mate bound with 𝐿𝐿, a hole in my heart. None of it was real, except for my stone. Try not to worry about such matters, my lady. Let us walk a while. There is a long day ahead. His voice was once again soft, and his arm comforting as he led me deeper into the woods. The moon was high in the sky, and I knew it would be dark a while longer, but the heat radiating off the generals was enough to keep away the chill in the air. We had been walking a little shorter than an hour when 𝐿𝐿 finally held his hand up to stop our small ensemble. "North wants us to stop for the night. 𝐿𝐿 go gather wood for a fire. Finn, go with him." The tone at the end of his voice was a warning, one 𝐿𝐿 didn't miss. He pouted and stomped off into the trees, a smiling Finn at his heels. Those two almost made me want to laugh. It wasn't long before they had returned, and a roaring fire was built right in the middle of the path. I hadn't realized they had brought any bags with them until they appeared at our feet in Turf, and 𝐿𝐿 started building a tent way off to the side. Mae was still unconscious, and I sat beside her on the wet grass as my eyes watched the dancing fire. I pulled the ruby out from my tunic and turned it over in my cold hands. A deep, dark red of the stone tore at my heart. It outshone everything around it, even the hottest embers of the fire. It was so beautiful. It pulsed in my palm, and the heat that surged from its depths warmed my chilled skin. I could feel the magic thrumming within. I smiled at its smooth surface. Immerse. My eyes snapped up to the pair of glowing blues staring at me over the fire. I slipped the stone easily under my tunic, and rose shakily to my feet as my stomach turned uneasily. "You're here." Of course. He was there. What kind of idiotic statement was that? I kept my moronic mouth shut as he let out a small sigh and closed his eyes, his large hand reaching up to run through his dark, tousled hair. Yes, his voice was a deep mutter as it reached my ears over the crackling fire. I watched with wide, and rather frightened eyes as he walked around the flames and stopped at my side. "Walk with me," he murmured before taking my hand without waiting for my response and pulling me out of the campsite. I could practically feel the 4 pairs of eyes watching us as we left. I couldn't decipher what he was feeling at the moment, not like I could in any normal situation. His eyes were still hard with anger, and his shoulders seemed tense, but his grip on my hand was soft as his thumb stroked the skin of my wrist. The simple action caused flutters to engulf my stomach as electricity shot through my entire body. How could he not be much when my body always reacted like this at the simplest of his touches? It made my head spin, and tried to bring frustrated tears to my eyes. I pushed them away. I would not cry now. Not yet, not in front of him. We didn't walk far from the others, and when he finally pulled us to a stop, he let go of my hand and turned away from me completely. I frowned at the cold, empty feeling rising from my hand to my chest. I flexed my fingers before curling them into the thick excess of my cloak. I watched as he took a step away from me. His blue eyes pointed towards the moon. We stood there silently for what felt like forever. But 𝐊𝐿𝐴 had been longer than a few minutes. Both of us staring silently up at the sky, ignoring the tension as thick as a blanket from around us. "Why did you leave?" He finally spoke eons later, his voice low as his gaze dropped to the thick trees. There was a certain calm ringing through him that frightened me, that suggested against pissing him off more than I already had. I had to see if the cave was real, if what Mae said was true. "And are you satisfied with what you found?" There was an edge to his tone, one that made it seem almost rhetorically crude. I bit my lip and glanced off into the trees as he was doing. "I guess that depends on what your definition of satisfied means." I mumbled quietly, even though I knew he could hear me perfectly well. I wouldn't say anything that took place in the cave was satisfying, except for the vision my stone had given me. Everything else was a disaster. All my thoughts and feelings during the little adventure was one big, giant mess. Satisfied, he sneered, his voice rising slightly as he kept the blue of his eyes hidden from me. As in, "Did you find whatever it was that was so important you got yourself in prison and crypt at the bottom of the cliffs? Are you satisfied that I spent 3 days tearing apart the mountain looking for you? Are you happy that I woke up to my bed smelling of you, only to find that you fucking left me?" His voice, along with his temper, rose in power with each sentence he spoke, and my eyes widened when he suddenly turned and slammed his fist into the rock fixture at our side. I jumped and tried to push down the strangled gasp that escaped my lips, but it was no use. The punch was so powerful it cracked the rock at its edges and caused the birds sleeping in the trees to take off in fright. North, 𝐴𝐸 was suddenly at my side, his arm almost circling protectively around me as his eyes dragged carefully over the fuming king. "I'm fine." Eric snapped, his breathing coming out as staggering breaths as his fist clenched and unclenched at his sides. The fire in his bright eyes slowly faded away. "I'm fine," he repeated on a much calmer note a moment later. I wrung my hands together nervously. 𝐼𝐸 shot me a concerned look, which I just smiled at, before he turned back to North. "All right." He nodded at the king, and gave me a small bow before retreating to the others. I pulled at the edge of my cloak anxiously. "I am sorry that I made you so upset. I promise it was not my intention. You're sorry." He snarled the words mockingly as he turned away once again, the blue of his eyes shifting black and back. I took a slow step towards him before wringing my hands in front of me again. It was so odd seeing him this angry at me. The other day, when he had been deranged and covered in blood, had been a blind rage. This one was deliberate. "I am, but I had to know. You never tell me anything, and I finally had the opportunity to figure something out for myself. I am sorry for upsetting you, but I would do it all over again if I had the choice." He didn't say anything for a few long seconds, and I was starting to fear that he never would. But then he let out a long sigh and turned back towards me. "You are right. I should have realized keeping you in the dark for so long would have its consequences. I hated how he did that. How he made it sound like I was some agreement that had its ups and downs. Yes, you would not have ran away if I did not hide so much from you. I rolled my eyes and let out a strangled sigh as the blue of his turned to the night sky. I did not run away. I was going to come back after I saw the cave. And yet, you never would have made it if I did not save you. Well, that part was true. The anger seemed to slowly leave him once again, and his body eased as he leaned back against the rock. The ruby thrummed slightly against my chest, and I let its warmth seep into my heart as I watched him. Everything I felt for him I knew to be real. Mate bond or not, the elders did not fake my emotions for him. But oh, how I wished the mate bond between us was real. I could continue to go on like how we were, to pretend that the connection between us was destiny and not part of Adriana's soul. But that would be beyond cruel. If I was not his true mate, then he must have one out there, one he would not have a problem sharing his secrets with opening his thoughts and emotions too, one he would love with his entire heart. I rubbed my hands down my face to hide the anguish there as I swallowed the hard lump in my throat. It made my jaw ache. Yes, it would be very cruel to not tell him the truth. He deserved to happy. Adriana's is real. Eric, I said softly a silent moment later, even though my heart constricted in my chest with each word that passed my lips. He found me in the cave. I saw him there. I found you in the cave, even though I shouldn't have had to. His voice was back to that unpleasant snap, his blue eyes icy as I shuffled in front of him. As you've mentioned many times already. He growled, but made no comment as I reached up to rub the ruby hidden behind my tunic in comfort. I think I really am his star. I murmured more to myself than him, even though the tension that zapped between the two of us was thick as the fog at the bottom of the cliffs. I wasn't sure if he could sense the uneasiness boiling inside me, or the remorse I was trying to fight, because his eyes slowly softened, and he let out a long sigh. This doesn't change anything between us. 𝐸, and he spoke as if he knew the exact thoughts that tumbled around inside my mind. I shook my head and resisted the urge to pull at my hair in frustration. This changes everything. Eric, Adriana's is real. And if I truly am the star, then we can't be mates. We are not real. I could feel the words choking my throat, but I tried to hide it as I gripped tightly onto the warm stone through my cloak. It's just his soul inside of you that binds us together. My voice was tight in my chest, and the words were hard to believe, especially with the way my body reacted at being so near to him. My heart ached at the simple sight of him. At one look at those bright blue eyes, everything inside of me screamed that I loved him. But that man in my vision, the one with the ruby red eyes, Adriana's, I knew he owned my entire being. There was once a time I would have given my soul to him if he had asked. Why was this happening? Why couldn't my life be as simple as I once believed it to be? These thoughts, this turmoil, was going to drive me insane. He growled, and the soft look in his eyes disappeared as he stepped towards me. A sliver of panic cracked through my body, but I held my ground. I wouldn't back down from him, from this, especially if this was the conversation that decided our fate. This is real. 𝐸. He snarled as his arm wrapped around my waist and drew me hard against his chest. I gasped, both at the action and at the electricity shooting up my spine from his touch. This feeling every time I touch you, every time I see you, courses throughout my entire being, not just some part of my fucking heart. My own seemed to beat 1,000 miles a minute in my chest. My fingers curled against the bare skin of his chest, and it took all I had in me not to throw my arms around his neck and cuddle into the warmth of his skin. Don't you dare deny that you feel it too. He growled into my ear, his voice hard as his arm tight and around me. I immediately shook my hand and let my palms lie flat against his firm skin. I do feel it, which just makes this all the more confusing. How can I be your mate? And his star? How can this all be possible? It's driving me mad. My breathing was turning hard in my chest, and I was disappointed at the frustrated tears trying to cloud my eyes. I could almost feel him ease against me, his hard arm loosening around my lower back until it felt like he was giving me an endearing hug. Try not to worry over such things. You will only upset yourself if you do. Just know that you are mine, and you will always be mine. I wanted to frown at his words, even though they reassured me a little. That didn't solve anything. It only made my anxiety worse. But I let my arms curl around his waist in a hug I had wanted to give him for months anyways. I didn't know what our future held, but I knew at that moment I only wanted him. He sighed into my hair, his breath hot as it brushed against my skin. His other arm reached up and curled around my back until I was pinned as tightly to him as he was to me. I am happy you are okay, my little Imrie. The feeling was surreal. His strong, huge arms wrapped around me, his beautiful face buried into the crook of my shoulder as he held my body nearly off the ground and against him. It was better than I had ever imagined, and I never wanted it to end. The stone from met against me in agreement, but that was something from my little adventure I wanted to keep a secret. Eric had a part of his god, and now so did I. I would tell him one day, eventually, but for now, the stone was mine. Chapter 32. Nightmares plagued my dreams, or maybe it was the other way around. Little snippets of images flew past my mind's eye over and over again. Images of blue eyes and the feeling of a tight embrace, of red stones and slow, loving smiles. It both made my heart soar and ache. Images that refused to let me sleep. My eyes blinked slowly open as I let out a long, soft sigh. My head ached, and my heart beat furiously in my chest. Would this confused, endless cycle in my brain never end? Eric lay sleeping beside me, his breathing steady as his thick arm rested heavily along my waist. He hadn't moved once, not since lying down on his stomach beside me in the small tent 𝐊𝐢𝐳𝐬 had constructed. He had fallen asleep almost immediately, and I smiled as the hard lines and ridges of his handsome face once he fell into a peaceful slumber. At least one of us could sleep, but as I watched the planes and ridges of the hard muscles in his back move with each breath, I could see the tension strumming through his body. His grip around me did not ease throughout the night, and even though his face was pressed against a pillow that someone had managed to bring, I could see the readiness of his resting brow. He was not letting himself rest as deeply as before. I blinked up at the burnt orange color of the waxed linen tent and let my hand run soothingly over the bare arms circled around my stomach. He made a noise in the back of his throat, his arm tightening around me, before relaxing once again. My heart was beating 1,000 miles a minute at how close we were, at the way he was clutching me tightly to his side in his sleep. I understood why he was being so touchy, why he refused to give me any wiggle room at all. I knew he feared me running off again, no matter how many times I reassured him I would not. But being this close to him, after so long of being pushed and kept away, made my head spin. I still didn't know what to think about any aspect of this situation, but he had told me not to worry over such things, and for once I felt like that would be the best option. At least, for a little while. I lifted my hands gently away from his strong forearm and pulled the brilliant ruby out from beneath my tunic. I held it softly in my fingers, marveled at the precious stone and its deep color. It pulsed in my grasp and spread warm throughout my hands. A smile pulled at my lips. My beautiful stone, with a color to best even its creator's eyes of eternity, for it was my truth in my past, and proved the lies of reality, the dearest thing to my heart. The sudden thought made my eyes widen in surprise, but it was true. The ruby was not a simple precious stone found in the depths of a crypt, but an immortal totem that radiated power and warmth, a piece of his heart, to hold with you always. He had been there, in the cave, or some odd, shadowy apparition of him had been. I had seen his eyes, those glowing, ruby-red eyes that stared holes into my own. He had been there, barely a foot away. After so many years, he finally found me, but then he left, as he did in Eric.'s story of the god and his star. Why? I was so enthralled in the ruby, in tracing its soft edges and lines, and reveling in the warmth that it radiated, in the love that it promised, that I didn't notice the pair of brilliant blue eyes watching me. "You did find a little treasure in the cave." I jumped at the gruff sound of his deep, sleep-infused voice, and nearly blushed as red as the ruby as I clutched it tightly in defense. But when my eyes flickered over to him, there was no malice or scorn in his gaze, only a soft light that made my insides churn. I eased my grip. I didn't answer at first, and instead held the large ruby a little higher into the air so he could see it as well. His blue eyes lingered on my flushed cheek for a moment before slowly turning on his side to gaze up at the precious stone. His arm slid away from my waist. It was his. Adrian USS. I murmured as my eyes once again followed its smooth edges. "Yes, I can see its power." My gaze snapped to him as he slowly gazed over every inch of the stone. "You can actually see it." He nodded and let out a small sigh before dropping his stare to my face once again. The attention made me want to crawl under the thick blanket covering us and hide my face in its warmth. Yes, it's like a series of dark, intricating circles and designs etched into its heart. Designs that I doubt I will ever be able to understand, but they are there. I knew it held magic inside, held power, its urge, and pulsed, and radiated warmth. It was not a normal stone, but hearing him say he could actually see its secrets made my love for the ruby grow. It was so odd, this feeling of being ridiculously attached to a materialistic object. But it was alive. It was a part of him, of Adrian us. I knew that with everything I held in me. "It is yours, Immerse, created for you. Your name is carved into its deepest depth." His voice had taken on a more serious tone, the deep recesses of it curling my toes as his strong hand reached up and curled my fingers around the stone. I watched his bright, electrifying blue eyes as he drew my hand out of the air into my chest, his touch gentle as his thumb brushed across the back of my hand. His gaze flashed and locked with mine, and the warm, glowing light shining in them surprised me. "Keep it close to your heart, Tamp." Whistling reached my ear, a happy tune that made my stomach flutter at its simple sound. I knew who it was before its owner ever appeared. It was so different from the voice of the others, much deeper, and much more amused, as he always was. I turned away from the window and leaned against its edge, both of my hands on either side of me as the man turned the corner. The blush that stained my cheeks was automatic, and I turned my head in the opposite direction when that familiar, flutter-inducing gaze locked on mine. Well, if it isn't my favorite little star. What are you doing out and about during the day? Adrian us leaned against the marble corner he had just turned, that always amused gleam in his eyes flashing in the bright light of the palace as I tried to rub the embarrassed warmth from my arms. "One could ask the same of you." He raised a dark eyebrow at that, and his large, rather appeasing arms reached up and crossed over his thick chest. That dark voice came out as chuckle. "I think that is the closest you have ever come to sarcastic response. I'm rubbing off on you." I flushed at the satisfied, almost proud, smile that crossed his unearthly beautiful face, and dropped my own towards the marble ground. I could never glance at him for too long. His presence seemed to fry all rational thought in my entire being. Then again, all the gods were like that. They all held that unearthly, eternal beauty that none could match. Not even the shining souls of the stars could compete with their beauty. It was unnatural and eternal. His gaze lingered a moment more before flickering over to the large set of wood indoors beside us. "Is he in a meeting?" he asked curiously as those bright eyes flickered back to mine. I nodded and let my hands rub along my arms soothingly, unease settling once again in the pit of my stomach. And it had nothing to do with him. Yes, he and 𝐊𝐢𝐳 had been discussing for a while now. I thought I had hid the nervousness from my voice well enough, but the sharp, narrowed look he shot me suggested otherwise. "Are you in trouble?" My eyes wide and at the sudden concern in his voice, and at the way that always amused light in his eyes disappeared. I gave him a soft, reassuring smile, but Cal didn't look him in the eyes as I glanced over at the large doors. "I am not sure." I admitted softly as he leaned off the wall and began to walk slowly towards me. Everything inside me seemed to flutter as he approached. At the look in his beautiful eyes. My soul always did funny things whenever he grew close. What happened? I shook my head slightly and tried to keep up my smile as he stopped just barely a foot away. His eyes hard as they studied every inch of my face. It's nothing, really. Just a little hiccup. I tried to reassure him, if only to make that concerned look in his bright gaze fade away. That is not what I asked. I let out a small sigh and reached up to run a shaky hand through my dark hair before gripping my arms tightly once again. He was a persistent one, and I was finally starting to learn that. I knew he would not drop that intimidating stare until I told him. Lord Eerie. He had the storm that raged over the Western Hemisphere on the mortal plane the other night planned for quite some time now. He even had it approved by 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐿. That concerned expression plaguing his beautiful features completely vanished, and his eyes grew amused once again as they shined as brightly as the moon he controlled. And let me guess, he started on a soft snicker, his lips pulling into a humorous smile. A certain little star saw a few mortals caught in the middle of it, and helped them to safety. My smile grew sheepish, and I tried to hide the heat rush into my cheeks as I gave him a small nod. His large body leaned a little away from mine as he let out a deep chuckle, his thick chest rumbling with the laugh. Yes, but Lord Eerie was furious. 𝐻ES been discussing with 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐿 over the matter for hours. 𝐻ES demanding I be punished for interrupting a preordained event. 𝐻ES shook his head, that laugh still tugging on his lips, as if the whole matter seemed ridiculously funny to him. Do not worry over such things. They cannot do anything to you. But no, there are no buts. You are a being of the night, a soul that shines as bright as the moon, that makes you mine, and everything that entails. I had grown used to his little flirtations over time, even though they never ceased to bring heat to my cheeks. But hearing him refer to me as his was a whole new experience, one I wasn't sure how I felt about. I stared up at him with wide and rather frightened eyes, but he only smiled and reached his hand up to rest against the top of my head, like one comforting a pouting child. In all reality, you and any other star in the heavens are my responsibility. They cannot do anything to you, or against you, without my say-so. So he murmured on a soft smile, the amusement in his bright eyes fading as a serious tone took over his words. Do not worry over such things. The relief that swept over my shoulders was unexpected, but I knew, with that look in his eyes, that he meant every word. A part of me knew that he meant every word he ever spoke, even the most ridiculous of notions and innuendos. 𝐻ES, this is a surprise. Lord 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐿 was standing just inside the large wooden doors, his massive body twice the size of any other god I had yet to see. His eyes were a multitude of swirling seas that glowed against all light in the heaven, and his hair was as dark as the blackest sky. Just being in his presence made me want to bow my head and confess all my wrongdoings I had ever committed. For he was the god of the heavens, and all its inhabitants. He ruled all. Eerie was standing beside him, a pleased, sadistic smile pulling on his lip. His hair was a stark white that shone against the pale green of his eyes, and made the beauty of his appearance even that more pronounced. For a being so in tune with nature, he was a disastrous monster, responsible for every horrid storm and natural calamity that tormented and killed civilizations. He held no remorse, nor guilt, and enjoyed the destruction in his wake. You did not want to be enemies with him. 𝐻ES turned to face the two gods, that lazy, amused expression resting on his handsome face once again as his large back nearly blocked mine from view. I was oddly comforted by the protective act, and found myself trying to press against the hard plane of his body. Then I jumped at the realization and pulled quickly away. 𝐻ES might have been a flirt. A huge flirt, but he wasn't one for contact. Yes, I came to see you about a matter, but found you were busy discussing about my little Immerse here. I watched from my hidden position behind his large back as the great god 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐿's gaze flickered between us. Lord Eerie's sadistic smile pulled into a satisfied flash to mine. Indeed. I believed we had just decided on a punishment for. I could feel my soul clench in my chest. Could feel the panic start to build deep inside as the god's words left his mouth in a malicious grin. 𝐴𝐸𝐺𝐻 did not move. There will be no punishment. I watched as that victorious smirk plastered on Aries' face vanished, and his green eyes began to glow in rage that was all too familiar for him. It is already decided. You do not have a say in the matter. He snarled at the god of the moon before me, his pale fist clenching at his sides. 𝐾𝐞𝐬 stayed silently to the side, his all-knowing eyes watching the scene in placid amusement. I resisted the urge to press myself into 𝐴𝐸𝐺𝐻's back and bury my face against him. Immerse is a being of the night. I have every say in the matter. She belongs to me. The deep-seated fury that flashed across Aries' face was enough to make me cower where I stood. But 𝐴𝐸𝐺𝐻 did not waver. You arrogant, pompous, self-righteous. In my eyes, she did a kind service to the helpless beings in need. I see no harm done. The situation is closed. She interfered with the cosmic matter. She, as well as the others, know their place. He growled beside 𝐾𝐞𝐬, his green eyes alight in anger as 𝐴𝐸𝐺𝐻 leaned casually against the stone wall beside us. Yes, in my domain. You hold no power over her or the others now. He sneered and took a threatening step forward as my gaze flickered nervously between all three of them. But 𝐾𝐞𝐬 does. And he decided a punishment was deemed necessary. Actually, I quite like 𝐊𝐢𝐺𝐻's take on the matter. From here on out, all situations regarding the stars fall on him. 𝐾𝐞𝐬's multitude-colored gaze flashed in amusement. As delight filled my stomach, everything would be all right now. Eerie was furious. I had never seen such a look of pure hatred before, and it honestly tore at my heart. But he didn't stay long enough to act on the fury in his eyes. With a bright flash of light, he disappeared, even though tension still lingered in the air. 𝐾𝐞𝐬 sighed and shook his head before turning back to the double doors. Now that that is settled, would you like to discuss what you originally came for? 𝐴𝐸𝐺𝐻. Yes, give me a moment. The god of all nodded briefly, his marvelous, ethereal eyes flickering over to mine before a soft smile pulled at his lips. I watched as he slipped once again into the great hall and closed the large door behind him. I let out the deep breath I hadn't realized I was holding on a long sigh. Well, but that could have gone worse. 𝐴𝐸𝐺𝐻 chuckled and turned to me with a bright, victorious smile. There now, he teased softly as I nearly crumbled against the wall in relief. I told you not to worry. Thank you. You did not have to do that. I murmured up at him with a small smile, one that he returned. Of course, I did. I would not let that fool ever cause you pain. My chest fluttered at his words, and my gaze dropped bashfully to the ground as he turned towards the large wooden doors. And do not forget what I said. Little star. My head lifted just enough for my eyes to blink over at him curiously as he shot me a wide smile over his shoulder. You are mine. You will always be mine. 𝐴𝐸𝐺𝐻 looked troubled. 𝐖𝐸𝐺𝐻𝐻 murmured softly the next day as we walked side along the mountain's path. Is everything okay? His voice surprised me, and I jumped slightly as he leaned close to my ear. Why, yes. Sorry. Everything is fine. Which was exactly true. But he did not need to worry about the turmoil raging inside my mind. The dream that had plagued me once I was finally able to fall asleep had left my heart aching and head spinning. This world, this life, just kept getting more and more complicated. But his voice wasn't hard or scornful. If anything, it was rather playful and teasing. It brought a smile to my lips. Eric had left the camp before everyone else that morning, without an actual reason why, but a promise to return to the group before long. It just added on to the weight on my shoulders. Just more secrets and hidden thoughts. Turf was trudging a few feet ahead of us, his head pointed forward and his golden eyes alert for any mishap that might be waiting around the corner. I rolled my own eyes. The general never knew when to relax. Mae was walking at my side. Her head bowed to the ground and her cheeks red every time a general asked her a question. It was rather immediate. Then 𝐿𝐷𝐿𝐿 were following closely behind, Their laughter and mischief forced a smile to my face. They were both very entertaining. 𝐿𝐸 seems to be in a mood. I grumbled as the path grew steeper and steeper the further up the mountain we traveled. When is he not? 𝐿𝐸 laughed back, his strong hand reaching up to 𝐿𝐸 the dark recess of his hair. I heard that. The kind third in command snapped over his shoulder, but made no move to say anything else. I sighed and shook my head as his shoulders only seemed to tense. You need to learn to lighten up, General, and you need to learn to do what you're told. My lady. He snapped back, but kept his bright eyes plastered ahead of us. There's no need for that tone. 𝐿𝐸. 𝐿𝐸 scolded beside me as Mae watched the encounter with wide eyes. Perhaps I wouldn't use it. If she didn't get into trouble so often. I wouldn't say often. He only growled in response and let out a dark huff before ignoring us once again. Perhaps if he had a mate, he would not be so grumpy. I grumbled under my breath so only 𝐿𝐸 would hear as we continued the long journey up the mountain. I was surprised at the soft and rather sad smile he shot me. He did have a mate. My head snapped around, and my eyes nearly popped out of my head as I stood boggling up at the large wolf-borne. He only gave me a small nod. Yes, he did. A very long time ago. And he had been happy. A happy 𝐿𝐸. That was something I would do nearly anything to see. What happened? I murmured softly as a light trail of snow began to fall from the sky. 𝐿𝐸 let out a small sigh and ran his fingers through his hair once again. What always happens with time. She died. But this is not really my place to say anything. My lady. Of course. I'm sorry. I dropped the subject almost immediately. But it plagued my thoughts for the rest of the day. 𝐿𝐸 had a mate once. Had been in love and happy. I couldn't possibly imagine how it would feel to have that. And then lose it. The stone pulsed against my chest, and I reached up to press my palm against it through my tunic. I did not know what Eric and I truly were, if we were mates or not, but I knew I would not be able to handle it if he died. If I lost him. I've nearly given my life for him before, and I knew I would do it again if I had to. My heart ached more for the gruff general than it ever had before. Chapter 33. Close your eyes. I tried not to frown as I gazed over at the behemoth of a man. I didn't trust the sneaky glint in his ruby red eyes, or the smirk pulling at his full lips. I narrowed my gaze at the laughter dancing through his. Just close your eyes. Trust me. I hated when he said that. It always made me feel so guilty. But despite the small unease settling in my stomach, I did as he asked. I did trust him. With everything in me. His low chuckle rolled slowly in the air around us. I was surprised when the soft touch of his lips brushed against my own. But I kept my eyes closed and leaned into the gentle kiss. What was that for? My voice came out as an airy whisper when he pulled away. My eyes still closed against the bright light of his, because I wanted to. 𝐿𝐸. Do not look yet. My head was still reeling from his kiss, but I didn't miss the way his strong arms wrapped carefully around my waist, his lips brushing along my cheek. I was too distracted by his touch, by him, to notice the air around us falling away, then whipping completely in the opposite direction. Hold your breath, my little star, I murmured against my lips, before his own were pressing against mine once again. I did as he said as the wind continued to drastically change directions. His kisses were fogging my mind, his arms pinning me tight against him. I didn't even notice when the floor beneath us disappeared, and light flashed behind closed eyelids. I gasped when my feet touched ground again and my legs shook. 𝐸𝐸 hold was the only thing keeping me steady. He chuckled as I tore my lips from his and sucked in a deep breath of air. His arm as strong as steel as I fell into him. You could have warned me. I grumbled against the warmth of his chest as his embrace turned into a warm hug and he tucked my head under his chin. I told you to hold your breath. I wanted to lift my head and glare at the amusement I knew was shining in his eyes, but I was just too comfortably warm held against him. I even had to keep a disgruntled pout from my lips when he eased me away from his chest and held me at arm's length. You can look now. Immerse. My heart fluttered at the nickname that passed his lips, at the warm feeling of gold that settled in my stomach. No other god, nor star, called me such endearing terms. It only made my love for him grow. I blinked slowly up at the dark expanse around us, my eyes lingering on the shadowed trees and river winking up at us from below. My chest clenched at the sight, at the cool air surrounding the mountain, at the other stars gleaming in the sky. He had taken me to the mortal plane. It's wonderful. My eyes were wide as I gazed over the beautiful landscape, my soul flashing in erratic spurts in my chest. We stood atop a waterfall, one with water as clear as crystal as it cascaded over its edge. It is the place I come whenever I travel to this realm. A sacred place. The amusement from his voice had faded as his hand reached for my own. I let him entwine our fingers. His so large and warm it felt as if I was grasping at the sun. I thought you would like to see it. I do. 𝐿𝐴 It's amazing. And it truly was. I had forgotten how beautiful the mortal plane could be. How untouched nature held miraculous wonders. I had forgotten being mortal. But this place, his place, was beautiful, not as amazing as you. I laughed at the ridiculous statement, which only brought that snide amusement back into his eyes. His hand tugged me back against his chest when I tried to step away. Oh, my sweet Immerse, how you mock me so. And all I ever do is pour my heart out at your feet, and continue to do so no matter how many times I gather it up and return the mess to you. He lifted his head from my shoulder, his bright eyes flashing black in the light from the stars, and sent his laughter rolling down the waterfall. I couldn't contain my smile, or gasp of laughter, as his hand suddenly let go of mine so his arm could wrap tightly around me. You will pay for that comment, my love. But there was no malice in his voice, no threat in his bright eyes, only that warm, arrogant amusement that always turned my knees weak. I am trembling with fear. His eyes flashed, and his lips pulled into a smirk before leaning down and tracing them slowly along my cheek. Yes, that is why, 𝐿𝐴𝐺𝐿𝐬. I practically squealed as his hands gripped tightly onto my waist and he nipped at my jaw. He only laughed and shook his head at my protest before brushing another kiss against my lips. Let us stay here a while and enjoy the mountain. I am not ready to give you back just yet, he murmured between soft kisses, his arms strong as they wrapped around my waist. I wasn't ready to go back just yet, to leave him, not when I enjoyed his touches so much, enjoyed his love, enjoyed loving him. The others would not miss me too much. You shine down here as brightly as in the heavens, he whispered against my lips, his touch soft as he cradled me to him. My soul fluttered in my chest. If I asked, he added uneasily, his bright eyes turning serious as his lips paused just barely from my own. Would you stay with me? Stay with me in the palace. Live away from the others. His voice was hesitant, and the restlessness in his gaze only worsened as I took a small sigh from him, my brow furrowing at the question. Why would you want that? And just like that, the unease in his eyes vanished and amusement pulled his lips into a smile once again. What could I possibly want from that? You with me, always. My eyes widened at that, at the look darkening his handsome face. My chest felt as if it were caving in around me. My gaze locked on his. Always. The words sounded surreal rolling off my tongue. Always. With me. Always. We both knew the answer without me having to say anything. It was in my heart. In his eyes. I let him wrap his arm around my waist again, his free hand warm as it reached up and gently stroked my cheek. I love you, Immerse. His lips brushed against mine once again, stealing the words from my tongue. I practically sagged against him as his arms curled me into his hard chest, and his kisses sent my heart to mush. Damn. There were tears falling down my cheeks when I woke, tears that clogged my throat and burned my eyes. There was a soft red light glowing from my chest, and a warm heat pulsing from the very stone. I didn't move as I watched the light fade, as the warmth slowly ebbed away with it. Movement to the side caught my attention, and my eyes snapped over to the blue pair blinking down at me through the darkness. Why are you crying? Eric asked as softly, his touch warm as he reached down and rubbed his thumb across my wet cheek. I could only shake my head and wipe at my other cheek. Just a dream. My voice seemed to come out as a choked croak, but he didn't seem to mind as he sat slowly on the empty space beside my waist. His hand left my cheek to stroke gently down my hair. Would you like to tell me about it? Yes, more than anything, but I didn't think it would make anything better. I doubted North would be pleased to hear me dreaming of kissing other men, of watching me drive myself over and over again into madness. I placed my hand over the ruby and pressed its hard edges into the skin of my chest. I shook my head and forced my eyes from his, despite the worried frown pulling at his lips. I do not like to see you so upset. His voice was soft in the quiet night air, the sound gentle and caring as his hand to slowly trace along my still wet jaw. I do not like to be so upset. I grumbled, which earned a small chuckle from him. It almost made me smile. My eyes flickered back to his and watched the handsome lines of his face as his hand continued to slowly stroke my skin. Where have you been? I asked softly as his concerned frown slowly faded away, his blue eyes shining brightly in the darkness of the room. A meeting. So late. I murmured around a yawn, my hand reaching up to press against my lips. His pulled into a small smile as my yawn finished, and he reached up to pull my hand away. My heart raced rapidly against my chest as his fingers slowly entwined with my own. I was sure what had changed his mind, but ever since that embrace by the cliffs, he has been a lot more lenient on touching me. We had arrived at the castle nearly 2 days before, but he refused to let me sleep in my own room. I had a strange inkling that it was mainly to keep an eye on me, but I didn't necessarily mind, especially since he practically cradled me in his arms every night. His thumb stroked the back of my hand slowly, his eyes intense as they blinked down at me. Yes, I did not like it either. He grumbled in response, his hand gently squeezing mine. I gazed up at him a moment, my cheeks sticky from dried tears. Should I even bother asking what it was about? His small, almost apologetic smile gave me my answer, and made my lips purse. But I kept the indignation to myself. Can I ask you something else? Depends on what it is. He grumbled down at me, his hand raising mine to his lips. My heart rose to my throat as he pressed a warm kiss to the back of my hand. It's about 𝐿𝐻. His eyes snapped to mine, and the blue in them darkened as he pulled my hand from his lips. I didn't like the sudden serious look crossing his chiseled face. What about him? I wanted to ask about his past, about the mate he no longer had, but Eric wasn't one to discuss his generals, even to his own mate, if that was actually what we were. Do you remember when we were attacked in the lower kingdom? And I hurt my head. His eyes flashed black, and a growl started deep in his chest, one that made my own eyes widen in surprise. It is not something I will ever forget. The dark crumble in his voice actually frightened me, but his hand in my own remained gentle. How did he save me? And don't say you will tell me in time. It's been time. Eons of time. He ignored the exasperation in my tone, and rubbed the pad of his thumb along the soft skin on my knuckles. I guess it cannot hurt now, he murmured before raising my hand to his lips once again. His other hand gently eased around my waist and helped slowly pull me into a sitting position. It was hard not to lose myself in his soft touches and gentle lips as they brushed along my skin. This was so foreign for him, for us, and I never wanted it to end. You have seen some of the magic I hold in my soul. He started softly, his lips just barely from my skin as he let them trail over the palm of my hand. Although it trumps that of any other wolf-borne, power thrives through all wolf blood. My heart beat widely in my chest as his teeth started to gently nip its way down to the soft skin of my wrist. His power. Is that how he healed me? Bright blue eyes flashed in the darkness of the room before he tilted his head further against my arm. There is power in everything. I gasped when teeth sharper than knives pierced my skin, and pain shot straight through my arm. But that one sharp sting disappeared as quickly as it came. A warmth, more stranger and strong than any I had ever felt before. surged from the grip his teeth had in my skin up my arm and traveled to every single part of my body. The ache in my throat from crying had disappeared. The cramp in my legs from traveling dissipated as if it were never there. And my always brewing headache subsided away. The completely pleased, content, and happy smile that pulled on my lips was automatic, and I found myself swaying dazed towards him as that warm feeling swept into the deepest parts of my soul. The heat suddenly streaming and pulsing from the ruby against my chest was nothing compared to the essence coursing through me from North. His mouth pulled away from my wrist all too soon, those teeth of his once again shrinking back to their normal size. I whimpered as his tongue slipped past those beautiful lips and licked at the few droplets of blood that escaped the bite. The wound closing almost immediately. It is a healing method, he murmured softly against my wrist, his mouth still just a hair's breadth away from my skin, one that should only be performed by mates, for it is the most intimate and soul-bonding experience two beings could share. Besides bedding their other half. That horrible he traced in a bright blush as his last sentence reached my ears, one I tried to hide even though my wide eyes and choked breathing hid nothing. His dark chuckle filled the room before his mouth pressed a soft kiss to my no longer wounded skin, and raised his head. Terrific. He bit me. The blue of his eyes vanished as the black of his wolf immediately took over. My heart hammered in my chest as his hand around mine tightened and low growl filled the air around. Yes. The look on his handsome face was one so hard and furious and caused the pale hair on my arms to rise. In order to save your life. His growl grew, even though his thumb went back to rubbing soft circles against my hand. That is the only reason I allowed him to go unpunished. To live. My gaze narrowed, and I curled the hand he held into a fist as I glared over at his dark eyes. Do not give me that look. Biting another male's mate, especially the king's, is a betrayal of the highest order. Death is a more merciful way I have seen used as a consequence for such a crime. He saved my life, yes, and he is not only alive, but also remains my general. My protests died on my tongue, and I felt that he'd stain my cheeks for a whole new reason. You're right. I'm sorry, I murmured down to our joined hands, my gaze dropping to the blankets laying rumpled beside us. Turf had bitten me, had risked betraying his king and all that mattered to him to save me. I shouldn't have been so surprised, or flattered. I'm sure when he weighed the options, biting me and ensuring North's wrath, or letting me die and sufficiently killing himself, the former was definitely more agreeable. I could practically feel the smug smile pulling on Eric's lips as those bright eyes watched my unease with amusement. My stomach clenched as he leaned slowly forward, that warm, soft mouth of his brushing just barely over my ear. I find your flushed expressions incredibly captivating, he murmured against the heat of my skin, his lips lingering above the soft spot just below my ear. My heart sped in my chest, the blood pumping rapidly through my veins. We were sitting so close together my chin nearly rested on his shoulder, and my free hand reached out to curl into the soft fabric of his shirt. Perhaps I should make you blush more often. His lips pressed a soft, lingering kiss just beside my ear before trailing slowly along my jaw. My breathing caught in my throat, as he always made it do. I think you do that enough already, I managed to grumble as he pressed a soft kiss on the tip of my chin before pulling away. A bright, amused glint shining from his once again blue eyes. Can I ask you something else? I spoke softly, and as gently as I possibly dared. If he was willing to open about one matter, maybe I could persuade him to on another. Ask all you like, but I cannot promise I will answer them. I wanted to frown and pout at his comment, but I refrained as my fingers curled and uncurled into his black shirt. If keeping my disgruntledness to myself would keep him talking, then I would suffer. Liberias. I have not seen him in quite some time. Did you? I let the question hang in the air, but he didn't need me to elaborate. The implication was there in my eyes, and reflecting off his gaze darkened. I told you I would. I gulped and blinked up at him as his free hand reached up to play with the ends of my hair, his eyes staring a dark, restless stare into my own. But then the hard look in his gaze fell away, and they flickered away from me uneasily. And I will, that the demon has not been seen since your last encounter together. My stomach clenched at his words, at the sickening feeling washing over me. His hand squeezed mine tighter as my face paled. You do not know where he is. My voice was shaky, my teeth biting at my bottom lip in worry as his eyes watched my every move. His magic is dark, and he knows much. What little spells he uses to hide will soon wear off, and then I will destroy him. Do not worry. You tell me that often. I grumbled down at his shirt as his hand left my hair to rub softly up my neck and along my jaw. Because I truly do not want you to worry over anything. You will only fry that little mind of yours, and I would desperately miss it. His lips pulled into a small, amused smirk, one I had not seen from him before. It made my insides erupt into a fluttery mess. What has got into you? I heard my voice whisper between us as his smirking lips dropped to my cheek and pressed a soft kiss there. You, he murmured just as softly, his eyes flashing as he pulled away again. I fear you ever leaving me again. Of you disappearing and I cannot find you. The smirk on his lips slowly disappeared, and the look in his bright eyes grew so sad it tore at my heart. That is what I fear the most. My little Immerse. His hand stroked my cheek softly, those blue eyes tender for once as he gazed down at me. That you will be taken from me, and I will never be able to find you. The story of Adranus and his star shot through my mind like a lightning bolt. A story of a god and me. A story of a life I did not remember or know. Erica's fear tore at my heart, and only added on to my own. Was it simply the part of his soul that belonged to 𝐊𝐼𝐺𝐻 that made him feel in such a way? I will not leave like that again. Eric, I promise. The sadness in his eyes did not ease, even though a small smile pulled at his lips. No, no, you will not. I started to roll my eyes, but thought better of it as his narrowed. I wanted to ask you this earlier, but there never seemed to be the time. I started instead, my fingers unclenching from his shirt to smooth out the wrinkles there. He raised a dark eyebrow at me, and his hand dropped from my face to grip at my waist. I could feel the heat of his skin through my nightgown, and I had to force down the blush at the lucid thoughts swamping through my brain. My stones surged with heat against my chest. I know Mae's an underling, but she does not have anywhere to go. Would it be too much to ask for her to live here with us? His face darkened and his blue eyes flashed as he pulled away from me, a frown tugging at his soft lips. I do not like the feline shifter. She has caused nothing but trouble. She is my friend, and has been with me since I have been awake. She is a part of the lie they force you to believe. His voice snarled around us, that growl from before rising in his chest once again. But it is not her fault. None of this is. She was thrown into the situation without a choice. You cannot blame her for that. I can blame her for taking you to that cave, for taking you away from me. I sighed at the hard, icy look in his eyes, and shook my head as I gazed out at the darkened room. He was being unfair. I asked her too. It was like she forced me out of the castle at knife point. That was my choice. But continued to glare down at me with dark eyes and a growl in his chest. His strong, chiseled jaw was clenched, and I wanted nothing more than to reach up and kiss away the tension there. Please, Eric. She has nowhere else to go. I begged softly, my hand leaving his shirt to stroke the clenched jaw gently. His eyes closed as my fingertips brushed along his skin, and he let out a long, tired sigh before resting his face in my hand. I will consider it. She may stay in the room she is occupying now until I have decided otherwise. It was a definite yes or no, but I knew it was going to be with him. I was just happy he was taking the time to think it over. His eyes blinked open, and that bright blue tore at my heart as it always did. You know my real name, and yet you have never called me by it. There was necessarily remorse in his voice, more like a confused curiosity. It made me bite at my lip. Would it not be odd if I called you by the very name of the one who I supposedly loved once a long time ago? I whispered softly, my eyes saddening as I dropped my hand dejectedly to my lap. A being who I was dreaming having visions of. A man who, with a few simple words, had me crying in 𝐊𝐿𝐼𝐻. The smile that pulled on his lips was sad, and the glint in his gaze tore at my chest. But he did not grow angry as I thought he would. Yes, I suppose that would be problematic. He gave me the sad smile a moment more, his hand gripping my waist tightly before he eased away. "It is still late. You should go back to sleep," he spoke softly as he squeezed my hand one last time before rising from the bed. "And you?" I asked as I watched his large form step away from me. "I have a few more matters to handle, but I should be back before too long." His eyes were soft, his touch even more so as he bent down and pressed a warm, lingering kiss against my forehead. "Sleep well, my little Immerse. I will be here when you wake. Make sure you are." I surprised myself by grumbling, but he only shot me a wide smile as he pulled away and turned towards the door. Of course,